Mr. Kurt Ellenberger.
Yeah. Hi, Daniel.
Welcome, Mr. Kurt. Book one Wonderview, and can you please introduce more about yourself that I miss?
Sure. I am a pianist. I no longer perform, but I was a professional pianist, and I'm a composer and an author and professor at Grand Valley State University, where I teach music in the honors college. I got involved with music. I kind of fell in love with music at a pretty young age. I was 12 or 13, and I heard some jazz, some Duke Ellington, and some classical, some Gustav Holst on NPR in Detroit. And I just thought, wow, what is this music? And so that really started me on my journey, and I got really into it. Practiced really hard. And by the time I was 17, 18, I was working professionally in the Detroit area, and worked as a professional musician for about a decade. And then I went back to school and got my degrees and became a music professor.
Music professor indeed. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world, Dr.
Yes.
Kurt.
All right.
Thank you. And tell us about your book materials and concept in jazz.
Yeah, this is my jazz theory book, and it's kind of aimed at beginning and advanced players. It's got really all of the materials that jazz musicians use in their improvisations, and it's all assembled in one fairly small book that's quite concise. It started out actually. I started posting on my door these little sheets called "Be an Instant Expert on." And so I would just write up all these topics like be an instant expert on pentatonic scales, for example, which is a 5 note scale. And so students would pick these up and say, "Wow, this is really cool," and they would read read my little be an instant expert sheet. And after a while, I had about 15 or 20 of them, and I thought, "Hey, I think I've got a book here." So, so I put all of those together, kind of cleaned them up, made them a little bit more formal, and that became this textbook, which has been around for quite a while, and it does pretty well.
Yes, and thank you for sharing to the world, Miss Dr. Kurt.
Sure.
Let's start with the raw materials. Beyond the scales and arpeggios, what are the essential melodic, rhythmic, and harmonic words or phrase that form the core vocabulary of a jazz improviser?
Well, a jazz improviser has to have a very strong grasp of all three of those: melody, harmony, and rhythm. And especially in jazz, the rhythm is tricky because it's not like in classical music where it's fairly rigid, right? You're going with the beat. In jazz, players play around the beat. So often the drums are a little bit behind the bass. Bass is kind of pushing the tempo a little bit, and that gives it kind of a what we call a groove that sits around where the actual beat is. So that's one of the hardest things in jazz is to pick up the swing, to be able to play swing and to be able to play in that groove, not right on the beat, but around it, and that's what makes it so exciting. In terms of melody and harmony, the jazz musician has to know what all of the great classical composers know, which is they have to know how harmony works. They have to know what scales go with which chords. But it's more than that. That's just not enough. You also have to say, well, I know all of this technical information, but I also have to make good melodies. So there's a multitude of different melodic approaches that jazz musicians use, but they put all three together in a cohesive package, and it is their form of expression. And when they get really good, that form of expression is unique and becomes a personal statement.
A personal statement indeed. And how do
Mhm.
you conceptualize and navigate chord changes mentally in the moment? Are you thinking vertically or in larger single something?
That's a great question. I think when you start out, you're kind of thinking vertically because you want to know okay, what's this chord and what notes sound good with this chord. But the better you get, you start to get rid of the vertical and start to go more horizontal. So you realize that you can play notes that aren't in the chord if the melody is reaching forward, maybe 2 or 3 measures, and that way the soloing becomes more unique because you're making decisions based on melody rather than what fits with the chords. But it's a great question. That vertical horizontal is something that has been talked about a lot, especially with European jazz, where they tend to focus more on the horizontal, whereas in the U.S. the focus has largely been on more vertical stuff with scale chord choice. So yeah, really insightful question.
Thank you for that empowering answer to Dr. Kurt. What is the role of inclusion and approach tones in creating tension and resolution? And how do you practice integrating these sophisticated melodic gestures so they feel instructual?
Well, what's really interesting is that when you're approaching a note, right? Let's say you're approaching a D, and you can
Mhm.
just hit the D, or you can go from above it, or or from below. And the ear accepts those dissonances because it's moving stepwise to the note you're approaching, which is D. So that's kind of what is meant by approach tones like that. And jazz musicians practice a very severe kind of discipline that is very similar to Baroque music. So what Bach, J.S. Bach, and other Baroque composers, the way they approach those wrong notes was very much the same as what jazz musicians do. So there's a great relationship between the music from the 1650s till 1750 and jazz in terms of how they approach how those approach tones. So to practice those, you just you learn all your chords, but you learn the note above each chord tone and the note below, and you get that into your fingers so well that you can just execute that at will. And that takes a long time. And then as you're doing that, you're really making aesthetic decisions on, what you want to bring to your improvisation and how you want to deal with bringing other pitches in that aren't chord tones.
I like that. Dr. Kurt, something good to listen every now and then. And tell us the concept of playing changes versus playing on the changes is often discussed. Can you articulate the philosophical and practical difference, and where does your own approach land on the spectrum?
Sure. So if you're playing the changes, that tends to refer to that you're highlighting the chords, right, in your playing. So you're the you could let's me put it this way. You could hear the chords going by in the improvisation even though there were no chords playing. So if I'm playing something all by myself, but I can hear you. The listener could hear the chords because I'm arpeggiating and highlighting those chords. If you're playing across the changes, you wouldn't hear that as much. You wouldn't hear the individual chords going by because the player would be thinking more horizontally rather than vertically. So playing the changes and highlighting the chord changes is more of a vertical approach. Playing across the changes is more of a melodic approach where you might have 3 chords and you completely blow off the chord in the middle because you're moving from chord 1 to 3 in a melodic way, and you don't highlight chord 2 at all. And this is what all players do. If you listen to I don't know, any of the '50s players playing rhythm changes, they'll there are 8 chords or 9 chords in the first 8 measures, but they totally ignore that and they just play in the key of B flat major. So that's really playing across the changes rather than highlighting the changes.
Highlighting the changes.
Mhm.
Okay, Dr. Kurt, tell us what does it mean to tell a story or have a narrative arc within solo, how do you think about planning for a contrast development, climax, and spaces across 3 minute improvisation?
Yeah, I think that's something that jazz musicians, as they mature, get really good at doing intuitively. So I don't think it's ever that, especially at a professional level, right? Uh, a professional level jazz musician won't be thinking, well, I'm going to build this solo in this way, and then in 35 seconds, I'll have my high point, and then I'll take it down. It's really when you're functioning at the highest levels, what's happening is you start playing an idea, and then you hear or you intuit, you imagine what the response to that idea is, and then you play that, and then you play the next response. So when it's done really at the highest levels, what you're hearing is the musician kind of having a conversation with him or herself. So that builds a unique solo, and that will probably have a high point to it, and then it will taper off, but it doesn't have to. Generally, it probably does. But I think the process is not one of planning. So it really is more of jazz at its heart is much more of a kind of a Zen practice where you have to get rid of the ego and just let the music do the talking and kind of be the vehicle for the music to answer itself.
Yes, let the music give you something else.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
And how do you balance the intellectual and intuitive in the heat of something making music just like you, in forms of jazz or any kind of genre of music?
Well, that's a tough one because I'll talk about jazz musicians and then maybe a little bit about classical music because I'm a classical composer as well. With jazz musicians, the way we learn how to play primarily is by copying other solos. So jazz musicians will transcribe the solos of famous jazz musicians and try to sound exactly like that musician. And in doing so, you figure out where their nuanced time placement is. You figure out what kind of scales they use. You figure out how they approach non-harmonic tones. You get their tone color. All of that stuff comes together, and you do that with a whole bunch of musicians. So, for example, I have stacks of transcriptions of Bill Evans, Herbie Hancock, McCoy Tyner, Keith Jarrett, Wynton Kelly, um, and others that I learned, and I learned how to play those and sound as close as I could to those players. So that's how you build your craft, right? In classical music, you do a similar thing. You study the music of other composers and you try to write in that style. So there's this method of early on where we're kind of copying. We're learning about the styles. We're copying those styles. We're getting good at repeating those styles, and then there comes a point where you have to say, "That's it. Now I not doing that anymore. I need to have all those skills at my disposal, but I need to do my own thing." And that's when you really have to drop any of the intellectual part of it. You can't think your way into a good jazz improvisation or a good classical piece of music. You have to do it by intuiting, by feeling what should come next, by listening to what you've written, and then answering the question, what comes next? And when you do that, I think that's how you develop a voice. But it is difficult because you spend so many years, especially in jazz, copying these other styles, and then all of a sudden you have to say, "Well, I'm really good at this, but I can't simply copy those styles anymore. I have to find my own voice." And that's where I think you really have to take all the intellectual machinations and put them aside and let the emotion lead, let your personality lead, and let that inner voice lead rather than some kind of intellectual or theoretical scheme.
Dr. Kurt, as an author, what are your short term and long term goals,
You
as
know,
well as a
uh,
musician?
yeah, as an author, well, with this book, I really wanted to get something out there that I could use with my students that wasn't complicated and that didn't impose a style on them. So this book doesn't have any stylistic characteristics or stylistic suggestions at all. So that was my goal with this book, was to have something concise, easy to read, and that would give you pretty much all of the information you need in terms of what jazz musicians use when they improvise. In my other writing, so I write, I'm an editor at contributing editor at allaboutjazz.com, where I've got maybe 25 or 30 articles up. And those articles, what I try to do with most of that writing is to take disciplinary ideas from music and relate them to a general readership in ways that can be fairly easily understood by an interested reader. So that, for me, that's really fun. I really enjoy bringing kind of high level music topics or music ideas to general readership, someone who doesn't know everything about music, and making it understandable. I really enjoy doing that.
That's enjoyable for sure, Dr.
Hmm.
Kurt. And good luck to your goals and looking forward for more success. And what will be your piece of advice for those people out there who want to be like you?
Oh, geez. If they want to be like me, I guess I would say don't be siloed in one area. Um, I'm a musician primarily, but I'm also an author, and I'm also a voracious reader, and I studied many other disciplines. And I think all of that interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary approach really fed what I did in music. So my advice would be branch out, think about other things that you might not think are interesting, but that actually are, and then bring those other disciplines and those other ideas into your primary area and see what that brings. That would be my suggestion.
Thank you for that
Sure.
suggestion and recommendation or advice, Dr. Kurt. And can you please recommend a book or books that influence your journey?
Sure. Well, the one article I was talking to you about earlier is this article called "Hearing Math and Seeing Sound." It's about music and evolution. And for that, I did a. This is an example of doing something that's outside of my discipline. I read two of Darwin's books, "The Origin of the Species" and "The Ascent of Man," because I wanted to see, what did he have to say about music and evolution. And that led me down a rabbit hole where I looked at a bunch of other research for almost 2 years, where I was studying that. So, I would recommend, if you're interested in those kind of topics, it's pretty fascinating to read, books from the mid-1800s, and then realizing how they were thinking about those topics then and how that's, maybe changed in the present day.
Yes, and thank you for that recommended book, Mr. Kurt or Dr. Kurt. Then tell us, how has your personal conceptual framework for improvisation evolved over time? What did you focus on your early years versus with, or what preoccupies you now?
Well, I think in terms of my early years, just the training part of it was just learning the standard forms, learning how to play in a variety of different styles, becoming competent enough to play with different groups and get hired. So there's that part of it. But then there was I thought, well, what how do I break out of this? And so what I started doing was I started writing my own jazz music, and it was highly influenced by my classical studies. So in that's where I really found that I could find a new conceptual framework for myself to play in, because I left the standard forms of jazz, and that kind of freed me up to do my own thing and to write my own music. And I felt like when I have my own jazz templates, then I'm not constricted by anyone else that's played that before. So I'm not hearing any other player on that. And that, for me, that was kind of a breakthrough, that allowed me to kind of do my own thing and find my own voice in the music. So again, that composition part of it is really really important. For me, it freed me up from the previous forms that I had trained in, because there was when I wrote my own tune, no one had ever played it. So whatever I played on it became the template, I guess, if that makes sense.
Makes sense, Dr. Kurt. And for the inspiring improviser feeling overwhelmed by all the materials, what is the one foundational concept or practice you advise them to focus to build a meaningful and personal connection?
I would say start to listen to yourself. Play something and then ask yourself again, what should come next? So once you get pretty good, it's easy for the fingers just to run the keyboard or to run the saxophone because you've learned all these licks. Stop playing the licks and start actually listening to what you're playing and then imagining what could come next and then play it and see what that sounds like. Because if you don't do that, then I think the playing stagnates and starts to be kind of derivative rather than original and unique and a real authentic expression.
Authentic, real expression. And Dr. Kurt, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season, abstract poetry in second season, and my book 101 review in fifth season too, comedy 101 in third season, and my food 101 in sixth season, geography 101, love letters, movie 101 review, music 101, our fourth season, science 101, sex 101, second season, my baby podcast law 101, mental health 101, and my Bible verses
Wow,
101. Plus, coming this December, Entrepreneur 101. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. So, Dr.
that's
Kurt,
impressive.
thank you. Ultimately, where
Yeah.
does individual voice and identity reside within the sophisticated application of all these shared materials and concepts?
Well, that's a tough question, but I think it resides in our personality. I think all of our experiences that we've had, all of the relationships that we've had shape who we are, and that develops your own unique personality. And when you can express that in the arts or in an essay or in a piece of music or even in a conversation, that's where you find that authenticity.
Authenticity indeed, Dr. Kurt Ellenberger. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. So, can you please invite our listeners to support your book, your advocacy, or whatever projects that you're doing right now?
Absolutely, yeah. If you want to know more about me, my website is my name right there, .com. So that's where you can find
Yes.
my music and my writings and everything else.
Yes, people, let's support Dr. Kurt Ellenberger because if you support him, for sure, more and more empowering books to come, more and more empowering music advocacy will rise. So, Mr. Kurt, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Mordecai, people, see you soon.